Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad. The World Cup is upon us, and it's about time we start to dig into the previews for it. So this is the first of 4 episodes here on Ranks FC. We're going to work through the groups from the World Cup, 3 groups in each episode. Today, we're going to start with groups A to C. My name is Jack Collins, and I'll be your host today. And joining me is the one and only Mr. Dougie Critchley. How you doing, mate?
Hello, Jack. I am good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm actually off this week from Sky, but I'm around about doing some content of my own and playing some golf and going to the physio just now as well. Just a general MOT, just one of those like, you're over 30 now, you're a bit creaky, so get a massage. And it was very nice indeed. But I'm excited for the World Cup. I've just kind of switched mentally from the club game into the international game, which I'm sure you've had to do too. Although your brain never goes too far away from international football. You're a purist in that sense.
Yeah, I do love international football. And like, it gets to a World Cup and I'm like, everyone else is on board now. This is nice. We can talk about it. Like me yapping away about the Nations League when no one cares a jot. And so it's nice to be able to dig into this stuff and to dig into it alongside you. There is plenty for us to get through. So I think we'll just get straight into it. Going to do Group A in part 1, Group B in part 2, and then Group C in part 3. And we're going to start with this first one. Mexico, one of the 3 hosts, top the billing, shall we say, for Group A. They're joined in there by South Africa, South Korea, and the Czech Republic. We'll talk a little bit about each of them individually, Dougie. But first and foremost, I'm intrigued by this group because I think it's one of the more open ones. There's a couple here that feel like, anyone could necessarily take the biscuit. But I think of all the groups in the entire tournament, this one is arguably the hardest to call, because it feels like 4 teams who are, 1, going to approach this in different ways, and 2, I don't completely trust any of them. And I think that makes for a fun place for this World Cup to kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was speaking to a South Korean fan a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, and we'll touch on some of their key individuals, but I thought they'd be feeling quite confident in this group. But he wasn't feeling confident whatsoever. And then sort of historically, Czech Republic had been much better at the Euros than at the World Cup, I think it's fair to say. Mexico are just the ultimate last 16 team. They're always in the last 16, always getting knocked out at that stage. Didn't happen last time. And then this South African squad is really struggling going into this tournament and feels a little bit all over the place. And have had even some visa issues which delayed their takeoff as well. So some unfortunate shenanigans going on for the South African players to get their heads around as they approach this massive tournament. But I agree with you. I think between Mexico, South Korea and Czech Republic, you can make a pretty good claim for any of them to top the group.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, let's start with the hosts. It feels only right to begin with Mexico. And it's a funny place that they find themselves in, I think, because obviously the disappointment of going out in the group stage and ending that long run of knockout stage placings in 2022 led to a bit of soul searching. There was a difficult period, the dark years of Mexican soccer where they were kind of dethroned as kings of CONCACAF by the States, who beat them in 3 consecutive finals between 2021 and 2023. Didn't go particularly down well with the public. There was a kind of rotating cast of managers who came in and failed to inspire between the 2 World Cups, and after Tata Martino stepped down after Qatar 2022. But in Javier Aguirre coming back for his 3rd spell in charge of this team, it feels like a little bit of that identity that they used to have is coming back. They feel a little bit more reactive, a little bit more like they're willing to go back to front quite quickly. There's some lovely rotations that we've seen from them in kind of the more recent months. The stamp of Aguirre has started to go onto this side. We see these kind of wingers coming in and playing as 10s, fullbacks holding the width. And it does feel like, despite the fact that there is confusion and a healthy dose, I think, of skepticism, there's always an element of that, I think, that's around Mexico. They do have the home advantage in all 3 of the group games. If they can ride that wave, there is enough talent here, I think, to be able to find a place for themselves and potentially get back to knockout football, which is obviously the main goal of banishing the ghosts of Qatar.
Yeah, 100%. And there's the very real chance if England managed to top their group of I think, a game at the Azteca, which is absolutely fascinating, between Mexico and England. So England fans watch Mexico with interest in the opening stages of this tournament. Of course, you can't plot out routes too early, especially before a ball's kicked, but that is definitely something to keep an eye on. But yeah, you're right. 7 successive last 16 exits. That came to an end in Qatar. Their recent form's actually quite impressive looking into it. So they're now 7 games unbeaten. They've got 5 wins and 2 draws in that time, including draws against Belgium and Portugal. Whenever I think of the World Cup, Jack, I think of, there's some cult heroes that spring to mind, and Ochoa is definitely Mexico's. But actually this year, he's probably going to be the understudy to Carlos Acevedo, I think is how you pronounce his name. So that's a little bit of a shame, but maybe he can get some minutes at some stage. But in midfield, there's Edson Alvarez, who I was always slightly disappointed with at West Ham. He felt like another victim of their pretty scattergun transfer policy over the last few years. And he's not the only big name arrival to struggle at West Ham over the last couple of seasons as well. There's Obed Vargas, who a lot of Atleti fans are very excited about, made quite a few appearances this year in midfield for them as well. And then up top, you look at Raul Jimenez, who you've watched kind of have a pretty difficult campaign in many regards. And then Santiago Jimenez, who's pretty much struggled non-stop since leaving Feyenoord for Milan. They've got 2 very good strikers there by World Cup standards that you can rotate. But Raul Jimenez, fair to say, Jack, wasn't his best campaign?
I don't know. Like, it's a weird one in that he came in and everyone was like, no, he's not Mitrovic's replacement, etc., etc. There's going to be more. And it never really came. Rodrigo Muniz had a purple patch at one point. I think the Raul's had a pretty good campaign. And actually, there's a fair argument, I think, for him to be, he wouldn't be Fulham's player of the season, but maybe in that conversation. That doesn't mean that he's scored loads of goals. And I do still think we're looking at a very different player from the bags man that used to absolutely bang him in for Wolverhampton Wanderers. But he's still technically very gifted. He still links up really nicely. And I think that will help. He's always he's never maybe found his best form for Mexico, but he has done more than Santi Jimenez in terms of actually translating some club form to the stage. And I do think the battle there might not be between Santi Jimenez and Raul Jimenez, but actually between Armando Gonzalez, who's had a really, really good campaign for Guadalajara. He presses really well. I think his nickname is the Ant. And because he used to be scared of ants as a child in his childhood. But he is one of those players, a little bit Julian Alvarez-like in some regards, not necessarily in terms of his stature, but who buzzes around and is a bit of a nightmare for defenders to have to play against. The goalkeeping situation is wild in that Acevedo had the shirt for a little while. Then he felt like he got gazumped by Raul Rangel, who has had a decent campaign. And then even he started to feel very mistake prone, which is why they've brought back Ochoa, who's obviously now playing his club football in Cyprus, but club football's never really when he's kind of showed his stripes. So 41 years old he will be by the time this World Cup comes around. I still think that one is going to go right down to the wire for Mexico. There's a couple of notable omissions. Richie Ledesma, who was obviously part of that big old custody battle between the US and Mexico in terms of where he's going to play, is a miss in this squad. He hasn't made the roster. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people in Mexico looking at that and thinking, that robs us of a more attacking presence in one of the right-back areas. Obviously, Julian Araujo is also out with injury. So they look a bit defensively more settled, perhaps. It doesn't look like these fullbacks are necessarily going to be given the license to roam quite the same way. Johan Vasquez, who's had a very solid, steady few years at Genoa, will probably be in the middle with Cesar Montes. But I think it's going to be in the midfield where they either make this or break this, right? We know about Gilberto Moro, 17 years old, absolute superstar for Tijuana. But whether he actually starts, considering that they finally got Alvaro Fidalgo, who plays for Betis, to change over and make sure that his allegiance lay with Mexico, and Lira, who's had a brilliant campaign under Aguirre since he's come back in, I think they might be a little bit more stodgy, a little bit more difficult to play against. But perhaps the sparkle that some people were looking for in this squad list is missing a little bit in those kind of areas.
Yeah, that seems fair enough, for sure. I mean, should we head on to South Africa? Because they've had a kind of really difficult last few years since obviously hosting the World Cup in 2010. This is their first one they've made. They made the last 16 of AFCON, which went across December and January this year, but they lost to Cameroon in the knockouts. They did finish third in 2023, so they've had a little bit of tournament experience in recent years, going deep as well. But since those 3 games, since that defeat to Cameroon, I should say, they played 3 games, and 2 of which were against Panama, and 1 draw and 1 loss, and the other one was a 0-0 draw against Nicaragua. So South Africa really aren't coming into this tournament with any form to speak of whatsoever. And I was looking at their squad list, and it was remarkable about how many players are playing in South Africa and haven't really ventured further afield. It doesn't feel like a sort of golden generation. It feels like anything but really. 19 of their 26 players play in South Africa. Burnley's Lyle Foster is the most well-known people to Premier League audiences, let's say. Had a little bit of a quiet campaign in a struggling Burnley side. As Ian Fleming was definitely their main man up front, but 3 goals and 2 assists in 26 Premier League games. I think 15 of those were starts. So he has had decent campaigns in the past for Burnley, but this didn't feel like him at his absolute best. I also thought it was quite interesting. I'm not sure what formation they're potentially thinking of playing. Maybe you can enlighten us in a second, Jack. But they've only picked 4 midfielders, which feels very, very light indeed. And as I mentioned in the intro, unresolved visa issues meant that they flew out later than expected to camp as well. So for me, South Africa feel like the whipping boy. But do you think they could spring any surprises, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it will be a 4-2-3-1. It's what they've utilised for most of this qualification campaign. And look, it wasn't simple by any stretch of the imagination, right? They ended up being fined or docked 3 points for fielding an ineligible player who, is one of those kind of ones where you're looking at and going, you've just made a mistake there. And it's been very difficult to kind of get there. It was Tahoba Mokoena, who's a really important player to this side as well, just happened to be a kind of error in admin in terms of how it went. And that opened up the qualification campaign. It meant that they went right down to the wire, but they got over the line. I asked for some help on this one because one of our patrons over on Ranks FC, Reese, is in South Africa and has been kind of giving us updates all season long about what's been going on with the Mamelodi Sundowns. And so he wrote in a message that I wanted to kind of get through here. And thank you to Reese for sending this in, because he was asking where he was going to get his space to talk about South Africa, and I was like, I know where you can go, mate. This is a special place. So he said, hi boys, wanted to give some proper thoughts on Bafana heading into the World Cup. First, get a couple of negatives out of the way. There has sadly been some seriously poor management by our association over the years, leading to points deductions to qualification, and more recently the departure delayed to Mexico because of visa issues. I'm sure this isn't a unique issue, but it's sad to think about how much mismanagement must impact so many teams around the world. Anyways, on to the good stuff. Following the 2010 World Cup, there was a dark period marked by poor qualification campaigns for both AFCON and World Cups. Bringing in Hugo Broos in 2021 has been a revelation, drastically improved our stability, and some massive results against Morocco, Algeria, and Nigeria, leading to a very well-earned third place finish in the 2024 AFCON. Broos has led the boys to the World Cup for his last dance as a manager, and he's been a massive reason for our qualification and success. And to your point about the 19 players playing locally, Reese says, another massive positive impact has been the development of our local league. The PSL has its issues, no doubt, but it's steadily grown professionally and financially to the most valuable league in Africa. It's led to some great developmental pipelines and, importantly, able to keep some incredible players on home soil for their clubs. It isn't to say that many of our players and clubs could compete at any top level, but it definitely has had the effect of retaining some both local and international star players more than any other leagues in comparison to our standings. Likewise, there's a massive support base for the PSL here, much bigger than any European league following. Not sure if it's well known, but I think it plays into our story in the World Cup in a big way. So this has really resulted in a genuine sense that the team will hopefully soon get on the plane, is homegrown, and that many of our players were born, raised, developed, and still compete here. It's led to many people behind the team and certainly the biggest following since the 2010 World Cup. But I also think it's genuinely translated into success on the pitch. It says, on to some players to watch. Roman Williams has become a legend for his penalty-saving record and will captain the boys. Our top player to watch is for sure Tahoba Mokoena, a really special DM and an integral part of both Bafana and Mamelodi Sundowns' recent success, with a habit of scoring stunners in big matches. And Mbakazi has been the most exciting player we've had for years, and someone who I really do believe could perform in top leagues around the world, still only 20 years old. He joined Chicago Fire in the summer, but it feels like he's had a great start to life there and will be an absolute rock at the back of our centre-back pair. Unfortunately, probably the most well-known player is Lyle Foster. I don't really love him up front, but he will probably start. And finally for you, the wild card, and one of the most exciting players in the squad I have to mention is Relabahile Mofokeng, who's had another great season and is sure to bring plenty of stepovers. I'm hoping we can find a win out of Czechia, South Korea, or Mexico, which will be a really special opener. Head probably tells me that a draw or two is the most likely outcome, but I'm incredibly excited nonetheless. I mean, look, The one thing I would glean from that is perhaps that Reece, there's a sense of kind of continuity and real like belief in this team, which hasn't been the case for so many different years. And knowing that they've performed well on international stages in AFCON and actually getting here to the World Cup, I think does give a sense that maybe they are in a group that does feel wide open to me, quite like being kind of cast as outsiders when actually they have a very kind of well-gelled group who know each other very well and come into this with plenty of optimism that they can potentially upset the apple cart.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like from Reece's sort of brilliant rundown there that they've got the team spirit pretty spot on. And, you know, the fact that they've kept it relatively local with their squad selection as well, maybe the chemistry would be improved on that front. Sometimes you see it with World Cups where there's such an ego clash between the players playing in these big leagues for huge money around the world versus the more sort of locally based players as well. And as you say, Hugo Broos being in charge since 2021, that's great continuity. And I was looking back at his career because I hadn't really heard that much about him. And prior to that, he hadn't actually been in employment since December 2017 with Cameroon. So this has kind of been the job of the latter stages of his career. And I wish them all the best.
Yeah, no, I think they're going to be, I think they're going to maybe bloody a couple of noses, South Africa. There's a sense of, you know, kind of togetherness around them that maybe isn't the case with every team in this group. And as you said earlier, that might move us on quite nicely to South Korea and kind of your thoughts on them, because on paper, they're my favourites to win this group, right? Like, this is a good side that have been, again, together for a long time. There's plenty of talent in this South Korea core. And yet, the mood around the camp doesn't feel like as positive as perhaps it would have done, given the fact that this group looks wide open.
Well, exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, we can touch on what happened last time out in Qatar as well, but their recent form is the thing that's troubling me most of all. They've lost 3 of their last 7 games. They conceded 4 versus the Ivory Coast, 5 versus Brazil, which can kind of happen against Brazil, but 4 versus Ivory Coast. And they also lost 1-0 to Austria as well. Their manager, Hong Byung-bu, has been in charge since 2024. He was their sweeper in that 2002 run to the semi-finals, eventually finished 4th. Since then, they've gone group stage, last 16, group stage, last 16. But in Qatar, I thought they actually did pretty well. They drew with Uruguay, which was a pretty good result at the time. They lost 3-2 to Ghana in what was a really entertaining game. And then they beat Portugal 2-1. Portugal already won their opening 2 games. They went through as group winners. South Korea then drew Brazil, and that was the game where everyone thought, oh my days, are Brazil back? Are they going to finally win their first tournament since, 2002 in terms of World Cups? They eventually lost 4-1. But you're right, in terms of that sort of well-known core of players, you know, there's obviously Son Heung-min, there's Kim Min-jae, who's kind of struggled somewhat to nail down a regular starting spot. It's very much been Upamecano and Tah this year at Bayern Munich. He probably has never quite got back to the level that he showed at Napoli in that amazing year under Spalletti, but still a high-quality operator. There's Kang In Lee, who I think is a really talented player. It's quite unfortunate to just be playing for this amazing roster of PSG talent where, you know, there's depth in midfield, there's depth on the right. If you want to play as a false 9, there's obviously already got a false 9 in Ousmane Dembele. And then they've also got Hwang Hee-chan as well, who's had kind of a difficult last couple of seasons, kind of dipped off from what looked like a really promising player in his first couple of years in the Premier League. I also thought there was quite an interesting story at right back, and actually can play a left wing back as well, in Jens Kastrup, who plays for Borussia Mönchengladbach, a former German under-21 international. He's got a German father and a South Korean mother, and he has recently switched allegiances to South Korea. So that is a story to keep an eye on as well. But it's just their form going into this, Jack. I don't know whether you've heard about, some structural issues or maybe some issues within their sort of harmony in the camp, but conceding 4 against Ivory Coast, 5 against Brazil, these are hammerings, really.
Yeah, I mean, they've really struggled, I think, in recent weeks or recent months post kind of qualification, because they kind of swanned through qualification in so many ways. You know, they were done with 2 games to go. I think it was Jordan that came as runners up to them in their qualification group. And they basically played 4 at the back for the entire way through up to that point. And then with it kind of secure, they've moved to a 3-4-3, and it doesn't feel like they have the wing backs to actually play that system. Now, it will help that Jens Kastrup has decided to switch allegiance because he can play in a number of different positions, and his versatility might well make him a wild card in this one. But you're looking at it and thinking, okay, well, how are you going to set up? Because we haven't seen as much of this. They have a couple of, really interesting players in there, and in the centre midfield, it's felt like injury has really disrupted the way that they've set up. But Hwang In-beom was one of the kind of breakout stars of Qatar 2022. And in Lee Jae-sung, they have a kind of grizzled veteran who can do a bit of everything in central midfield, can create and get back there. He's just coming back from an injury. It does feel like maybe the kind of spine of the team has either suffered form drop-offs or injuries at the wrong time. Heung-min Son has not been having a particularly brilliant campaign over in MLS. We know, as you say, that Kang-in Lee has been kind of a bit part player. Kim Min-jae has effectively been third choice centre-back for Bayern over the course of this season. And when you're looking at it from that kind of perspective, there is a worry that kind of hangover falls into the World Cup and you end in a quite a difficult position. On paper, they're still a really good side. But I actually do worry that this switch in formation and the fact that there does seem to be this gnawing idea that the fans and the media back in South Korea are completely unconvinced that this side have the minerals to go and do what they did in the last World Cup hangs heavy over me when I try and predict it. And that's quite a difficult thing to get behind in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the final team in this group is Czechia. I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, I was surprised to read, I just kind of forgot this, that they haven't been at a World Cup since 2006. That's a long time.
And that was the golden generation, right? Like Yankolovsky and Nedved.
Nedved, exactly. But yeah, as you say, it's kind of weird because they've been at every Euro since 1996. So their European record in the Euros is pretty solid. In Euro 2024, they lost to Portugal and Turkey. They drew with Georgia. That wasn't as impressive. But at Euro 2020, they were a really solid, organised side. They beat Scotland. They drew with Croatia. They lost narrowly to England. They then beat the Netherlands. And only lost 2-1 to Denmark in the quarterfinals. Denmark then went on to lose to England. Everyone knows what happened next. But they've won their last 5 games. They've beaten Ireland and Denmark on penalties to make it to these games. I'm sorry, Jack. And there are some key players to look at. What is slightly frustrating is that they've got an amazing array of very high-quality goalkeepers. Maybe you have too many high-quality goalkeepers. I mean, Matej Kovar is PSV number 1 after years of being number 2 at Leverkusen, finally broke out and took the move to PSV and has worked really well there. They've also got Braga's number 1 as well. Vladimir Soufal from former Premier League days at West Ham had a brilliant year at Hoffenheim. He was probably one of the league's best sort of right backs in that season at Hoffenheim, helped them have an excellent year as well. Obviously, there's Thomas Souček in midfield, but if you haven't watched him yet, watch out for Pavel Sulk as well, who had a great year for Lyon. Very dynamic, quite a slight number 10, but has got a lot of technical quality and really found the back of the net pretty regularly. I think he finished up with 11 Liga goals. And given his age, that's pretty impressive. And then up front, I think it always helps, and we'll touch on this in Group B with some of the sides as well, but it always helps to have a little bit of a talisman up front who has got so much experience. And Patrick Schick is now just a really, really solid regular goal scorer. When fit, he had so many fitness issues dominating the large part of his 20s, but he's now scored 20 goals for the second consecutive season at Leverkusen. He's done so for Leverkusen 3 times now. He's been around in terms of never quite making it at a massive super elite club, but a really experienced operator who will have good memories from Euro 2020 of really stepping up because he scored that phenomenal goal, which won goal of the tournament. I think he ended up with the silver boot, which is when you're basically tied on goals, but I think it was with Ronaldo, and Ronaldo got 1 assist or something like that. Anyway, he was slightly robbed in that tournament of not more accolades because he was brilliant. And he's coming in with form and momentum. So I think in this group, Czechia are potentially the side that could go in with the most confidence along with Mexico.
I mean, I think what's really interesting about them is that they're not trying to be anything that they're not, right? Like there was a chaotic qualification campaign that included a defeat to the Faroe Islands. And, we ended up kind of looking at it and being like, what is happening here? Because the manager was sacked and Ivan Hasek it was. And then Miroslav Kubek took over, vastly experienced manager at this level. This will probably be his final dance. And those kind of last minute qualification playoffs were his kind of first rodeo back at the helm of this team, but they ground it out, right? And they won 2 penalty shootouts, first against Ireland and then against Denmark to get there. They've been through an absolute roller coaster of emotions, these Czech fans, right? Because they were 2-0 down in that Ireland game and they clawed it back and then won on penalties. And then they were winning in the game against Denmark and they were holding on and not able to do so twice. And then they win the penalty shootout again. I think the mood has changed. Like, speaking to Czech fans before that Ireland game, pretty much all of them were like, we hate this team. We don't like them. They don't represent us. And suddenly in the space of, a couple of months, that's really changed. And as you say, you now look at the side and you're like, well, there's plenty of experience in that spine. I've always really liked Thomas Holles. He plays, his club football in Czechia. And he just seems to be the kind of player that managers dream of, right? Can fill in on the right-hand side of the back three, kind of plays opposite Critchley in that regard. And when you're looking at it and thinking, okay, there's a player that can drop into midfield if we need him in there, is happy in the back line, just a bit of like a manager's dream in terms of what he does. And he's very, very well respected in Czechia and for what he's been able to do for Slavia in that time. And I think that his importance in this team, the fact that they've known each other for a long time, and there's a little bit of stardust in Sulch and Schick up top, gives them a little bit of an element of differentiation here. The other thing that does that, I suppose, a little bit is their ability to score from set pieces, which is a massive thing at tournaments. We've talked about it before. They have a number of different ways of attacking here, and we can talk about Schick all we like and the wing backs kind of getting forward and making things happen. But having that ability to find the net from set pieces in a World Cup that's going to drain the energy out of people with the conditions and the altitude, especially if they're playing in Mexico, I think gives them something slightly different to almost everyone else in this group.
I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, Jack, people want your thoughts. How do you see this group being ranked?
You know what's funny? So when I was asked this, 3 or 4 months ago, when the draw happened, I had South Korea as my favourites to win this group. I thought that they were probably the best side. And now seeing them play in recent months and looking at it from a slightly different perspective, I've gone a little bit cold on them. Now, that's obviously risky because quality is quality and they have plenty of it, but it doesn't feel like they're anywhere near as settled as they might be. I think I would probably go that it's Mexico and Czechia that finish in the top 2 here. But I do think South Africa have the ability to spring a surprise.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you as well. I think Mexico top. I think that home advantage absolutely massive as well. Good with the conditions, of course. And then I think Czechia have second place as well. And then there are so many third place spots going through as well. So, South Africa, South Korea, you get one result and you're in a good position.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Right, we're going to take a little break there and we come back on the other side. Time for Group B. Stick with us here on Ranks FC. Welcome back to Ranks FC. Group A done. Group B we go to, and it's more of the hosts. This time, Canada at the top of Group B. They face Bosnia and Herzegovina, who qualified with that dramatic win over Italy, as well as Qatar, the previous hosts, and Switzerland. Dougie, it is still quite open, but not quite as open in the fact that I think that Switzerland will go into this as many people's favourites to top Group B.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, you look at the experience really of that Swiss side. It's still the same names that have been there for so long. I mean, I can't believe Ricardo Rodriguez is only 33. I feel like I've been watching him my entire life. There's, the likes of Nico Elvedi, very experienced at international level as well. Manuel Akanji, Remo Freuler still kicking around at 34. I would say potentially in the heat would be a slight issue, but then there's likes of Arden Yashari as well, who didn't really get going at Milan, arrived pretty injured and had a difficult campaign. Thought Michael Ibischer was absolutely fantastic in the last Euros as well. Up front, they're maybe lacking a sort of superstar, but Noah Okafor, I think, went under the radar. Everyone spoke all season about Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but Noah Okafor, given the fact that he never had a particularly impressive scoring record at Milan, I thought actually really stepped up in the second half of the season for Daniel Farke's side once they settled on that new formation as well. Zeki Amdouni's got experience at the top level. Thought Dan and Doy had a pretty disappointing year at Nottingham Forest. I think I was probably expecting a little bit more from a player that, again, similar to Michael Ibischer, had a very good Euro 2024 as well. Manzambi, definitely a player to watch as well at Freiburg. Was a player that I was expecting alongside Vincenzo Grifo to kind of take the fight to Aston Villa. As it turned out, no one really brought any fight against Aston Villa. And Aston Villa, they scored. I mean, we spoke about it, Sam, last week on the truth, but scored some absolutely phenomenal goals. It kind of just was a little bit of a soccer or a punch to the stomach, let's say. And by the end of the first half, it was kind of done as a contest. But yeah, so much experience in this Swiss squad, and given the quality of teams in their group as well, I think they look like the strong favourites.
Without reaching for the old cliches, I like the fact that Manzambi's a bit of a Swiss Army knife in there, right? In that he can play in all of the different positions in midfield. He can do a lot of different things. He's a good ball carrier. He can disrupt. And I think that, you have quite a settled kind of midfield line there of Granit Xhaka, who's had a phenomenal season for your Sunderland, and Remo Freuler, who remains just one of the unsung kind of heroes, I think, of international football and maybe club football in Europe generally. He's just been an excellent servant to everywhere he's been, and him in that Atalanta side was a really, really important key kind of element of that for such a long period of time. They're very settled in those areas, and you look at the partnerships in centre midfield, you look at the partnership at centre back between Akanji and Elvedi. There's a lot of players here who've kind of had that relationship for a long time. They have Murat Yakin in charge, who has kind of, I think, given a new lease of life to a squad that was already pretty talented. And I think that the thing with Switzerland is they're able to kind of go toe to toe with the biggest teams. And sometimes when you get that kind of side, they struggle with teams who are on paper ranked below them. Switzerland don't tend to find that to be too much of an issue. And that's the reason I think that they go and win this group, because actually they're very efficient in the way that they've put away teams in the kind of build up to this in qualification. And we've seen that at the Euros as well. So yes, there are, they're kind of a little bit worried that this team is maybe verging on the edge of being a little bit old. And Brilliant Bolo is not the kind of striker, I don't think, that is going to bang an absolute heap of goals, especially coming off the back of an injury. They were a little bit worried about him, but he's made the squad. It just feels to me like they'll have too much for everybody else in this group, and they have that ability to just grind you down and eventually find the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Who would be your kind of closest to Switzerland in this group, do you think, Jack?
I'm quite hot on Canada, right? And have been for a while now. It helps that I love Jesse Marsch, and that I think that some of his experience in management has not been given the credit that it perhaps deserves. And that's not to include his lead side, who, whilst were okay the first year, did fall off a cliff. I don't think it's easy to follow Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds United. And I think he was dealt a bit of a bum hand in terms of what he had to work with, although he didn't do particularly well with said hand, and that has to be accepted. What I have enjoyed about this Canada side is that they quite obviously have that Red Bull DNA, right? He's come in there, and I think his kind of looking over the entirety of this Canada program, the fact he signed a new deal and they want him to kind of oversee the next developmental pathways and take this Canada side forward. It's a good fit. There's a lot of really good athletes, I think, in this team, and that's what he demands from his sides, that they get there, they get up and down. I thought that they gave a good account of themselves in 2022. And obviously things were slightly different at that point, but it feels like they've gone down the right paths in trying to carry on from what John Herdman did. They've effectively upgraded at coach, but someone who's kind of sticking within that DNA. There's some very, very talented players in this setup. And look, not everyone's had a brilliant campaign. It's been difficult for Jonathan David, I think. Carl Aaron's done pretty well at Southampton, but it helps if obviously you know exactly what your centre-back opposition are going to be doing in every single game. I've loved Steven Eustáquio since he was there at Porto and was a big part of quite a lot of very successful Porto sides. And him with Ismail Kone in the middle, I think is a very good midfield partnership for them to build on. So plenty to like, I think, about this team. There's still question marks a little bit about blooding in goalkeepers and making sure that defensive line is as solid as perhaps it could be. But they have a team that now has been on this stage and understands what it is to represent your country at a World Cup, given the fact they have home advantage and given the fact that they will be able to utilize that Red Bull DNA. I think that they have a very good chance of coming second in this group.
Yeah, I agree. Jesse Marsch, I really like Jesse Marsch. I like the fact that he's a bit of a Twitter diva as well. Like who will bite back on there, which I quite admire as someone that also has the tendency to get a little hot-headed online, I think. So I like that from Jesse Marsch. I think I agree with you about some of their players maybe not arriving in their best personal moment. But I think your point about the athletes in their squad is absolutely massive. You know, if Alphonso Davies, even if he's only 80% fit, that's an amazing, amazing athlete. I think Liam Miller had a really good campaign for Hull City, probably his first really top level campaign in England. And then Tajon Buchanan has been revelation's a strong word, but he's been a key part of Villarreal's excellent season. An amazing athlete, very tactically flexible in terms of where he can pick up as well. And then Promise David, forget about Jonathan David. I mean, don't forget about Jonathan David. I actually like Jonathan David, but he has had a really difficult campaign. But Promise David for USG over the last 2 seasons, I think he scored 24 goals last year. I think he was close to 20 this year. Absolute unit, 6'5", has European experience now as well. So they've got 2 good options up front. And I think, there'll be a lot of fun to watch. Jesse Marsch teams, always entertaining. I love watching energetic Red Bull style teams. It's kind of a style that I can really get on board with. So I'm looking forward to watch Canada.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there is a chance that maybe if they don't top this group and they end up playing, it could be Mexico, right, in LA, can you carry out that same demand in terms of the physicality of what Marsch wants from this team in different conditions? That's going to be an interesting kind of development. If they go on and win the group, then they get to stay in Canada, which would be a massive bonus, not just in terms of the fans, but also I think in terms of the conditions in which they're playing. So plenty to like about Canada. And I think that they probably come in as the most settled of the 3 hosts. Now, I don't necessarily think that takes them the furthest of the 3, but I think that when you look at their setup and their preparation for the tournament, it feels like they're the most together. It's easier to predict the majority of the starting 11 than perhaps it is with either Mexico or the US. And I think that stands them in pretty good stead. It feels like they've been on a journey to get here, and they're getting here at a place where a lot of these players are comfortable. And I think that's a good place to come into the World Cup and be in that kind of light. Let's go on to Bosnia, because obviously not many were expecting Bosnia and Herzegovina to be here when they drew Wales and then they drew Italy, both in those 2 qualification games. I think most people were expecting them to be knocked out in the first round in Cardiff. They ended up winning that game on penalties, a little bit like the Czechs in some regards, and then they ended up beating Italy in the same way. But it is a huge moment for Bosnia, and there's a lot of very talented players in this squad who are going to either grab the spotlight or this feels like their last dance in the case of someone like an Edin Dzeko.
Yeah, and Edin Dzeko, same with the Said Kolasinac as well. That's 2 great stories, 2 players that have given so much to the game all around Europe for a number of different clubs as well. I like the fact for a side like Bosnia, who are probably not going to dominate the ball, that much of their quality is kind of bottom heavy, if that makes sense. It's really in their defence, less so with their goalkeepers, although they do have Nikola Vasil, who is at St. Pauli. But in Kolasinac, in Muharemovic as well, who Sam was profiling for a move to, was it Inter Milan or Barcelona on The Truth? Yeah, it looks really, really exciting as well. Amar Dedic as well, very highly rated fullback from Benfica. And then up front, not just Dzeko, who is an absolute icon of European football, I think really, really underrated. I mean, the work he's done for a number of different clubs now, particularly that sort of Roma peak, phenomenal stuff. But also Haris Tabakovic as well, from Borussia Mönchengladbach as well, who's a kind of useful player to have around so they can rotate Dzeko if needed, given the fact he is now 40. But it's a fairly inexperienced midfield where not too many names jump out. I mean, there's 2 of them have more than 20 caps, which is a slight worry, I would say. But look, they'll be absolutely delighted to be there. It's a group where I think 1 win puts you in very good contention. And given the fact that Qatar and Canada are also in there, don't write off Bosnia.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And look, they have 2 very, very exciting youngsters in Ali Begovic, who's had a phenomenal campaign at RB Salzburg, and Bayraktarovic, who obviously was part of the US setup and decided he was going to represent Bosnia and Herzegovina, has come through at a PSV. And whilst he's not necessarily a starter or a stalwart in that team, I think has had a good campaign in terms of his output and kind of moving towards it. So at 19 and 21, those 2 feel like they're very exciting ones to be able to throw in and maybe change a game on a sixpence. And when you have that alongside that experience that we talk about quite regularly, I think it's a nice place for them to be. I'm not expecting miracles, and I still think they probably do end up coming 3rd in this group. But they're a difficult team to break down, as you kind of point out there, as Wales and Italy both found out in these playoffs. And we're kind of coming to them at a moment where it feels like everything has come up trumps for them. The country is now behind them again, and there's plenty of talent to get stuck into if they get the ball out to the right areas of the pitch. So I'm excited to see how they do. But I think getting there for Bosnia and being back in a World Cup after such a long period of time feels like the moment you're like, wow, okay, this is now, their moment to get into that spotlight and shine. And perhaps the pressure will be off, and that can do some fun things to players.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they've got a very decent chance of getting a win against our final side in Group B, which is Qatar, managed by Julen Lopetegui. Absolutely amazing that he is committing his time after that difficult spell with West Ham to Qatar. But yeah, this is a squad packed full of experience at this level. There are, by my count, 6 players with over 100 caps in this Qatar squad. There are a decent amount of them that are over the age of 34, which is maybe a slight concern. But given the kind of conditions they often play in at home and in their domestic leagues as well, although, I mean, Qatar's got such sort of incredible facilities in many ways. I imagine a lot of those are air-conned, and maybe they would struggle a little bit more in certain parts of the US and North America than they would at home. But this is a squad where, experience seems to be their key weapon. I can't say I know too much about any of their players, really. I'm not a regular watcher of the Qatar League as well. I mean, their only player that's playing in Europe is Homad Ahmed, who plays for Cultural Leonessa, the defender. But Julen Lopetegui, I imagine it's probably only up until the end of the World Cup, so he'll be hoping for a decent display from Qatar. You imagine he'll probably play a variation of 5 at the back, and they'll be kind of clinging on to any hope of maybe even a draw in this group. I imagine they will be the whipping boys, unfortunately.
I mean, it's a difficult one because I think when you look at it, they obviously hosted the last World Cup. There was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of money plowed into those facilities, and they kind of flattered to deceive. And you know what? Looking at them in the build-up to that World Cup, there were some things I looked at and was like, okay, this is quite interesting. There's some intriguing players in terms of what this looks like. And, chief amongst those at the time was Akram Afif, right? Who kind of broke through back in sort of 2018, 2019 at the Asian Cup. And everyone was like, wow, this kid can play. And now he feels like one of the kind of more elder statesmen of this team. I think he's second or third in terms of the amount of caps, although he remains only 29. There is a lot of, players in here, Almoez Ali, and that kind of partnership that we thought we might see from those two was one of the kind of, are we going to get this in the 2022 World Cup? Qualification was a bit of a mess. They finished 4th, I think, in their group of 6 and squeezed through a game against the UAE to actually get here. It doesn't feel like they are massively in the best kind of place. But, we talk about experience. We talk about the fact that I think it's 25 of this 26 are going to end up being from players who play within the domestic league in Qatar. They all play for one of about 5 clubs. There are going to be those bonds and those kind of elements of it that they're used to each other. They know each other very well, even from playing on opposing sides, as opposed to playing alongside each other. Maybe that gives them a little bit of an edge in a tournament where a lot of places are calling players in. We talked about it with South Africa, right? Does that kind of PSL contingent give them an advantage in that they're a group that knows each other incredibly well? Maybe that's where Qatar Liam. I'm not hugely hot on Lopetegui as a manager at this point. There was a period in his career that I thought he was really on kind of a very good trajectory, but it's not really been particularly pretty for the last 4 or 5, or really since he kind of left the Spain job for Madrid, and that ended up being a disappointment. It's been one kind of failure after another, and I think he would have to perform a relative miracle to actually squeeze the juice out of this team in a way that, you look at other managers who we're talking about with teams who maybe aren't the most talented, but you squeeze every single drop out of what they have. This doesn't feel to me like a match made in heaven. So I struggled to see them, really causing a huge mark here.
Yeah, they would be my bottom place side. In terms of predictions for Group B, I think I'm going Switzerland top. I actually might go Bosnia, surprisingly second, and then Canada in third. Or is that a bit mental with the home advantage? You know what? I'll stick with it. Come on, the Bosnians.
Well, it means that we're different anyway, if that I have that idea as my second place for the time being. And that wraps up Group B. After the break, we'll finish this episode with our Group C preview. Make sure you stick with us here on Ranks FC. Welcome back to Ranks FC and the first of these 4 World Cup preview podcasts. Jack Collins and Dougie Critchley alongside you. And we're going to Group C, which is one that a lot of people have eyes on, Dougie. Brazil, Morocco, Haiti and Scotland in this group. So home nation in the mix from a UK perspective. Brazil in the mix from a worldwide, it's the World Cup perspective. And Morocco in the mix in terms of got to the semi-finals last time out and are the official, should we say, in inverted commas, winners of AFCON, even if we're not calling them thus at this point. And then Haiti, who are a wonderful story in their own right. This is one of the groups that maybe isn't quite as open as the other ones, but it does feel like there's plenty of intrigue and plenty of interest.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how Steve Clarke's feeling about it deep down, the Scotland manager. You know, haven't obviously qualified for the World Cup for so long, finally get there. And then they do draw a tricky looking group, I would say. I mean, Morocco were probably the story of the World Cup in Qatar, aside from Messi getting his crowning glory. They were really the feel good story. I mean, I might as well start with Haiti, given the fact that, you know, they're probably the easiest to do. But having said that, they've been on an amazing recruitment pull of players from all around Europe that have, committed to them for this tournament and beyond. Most notably of all, from my perspective at least, Wilson Isidore of Sunderland, who started the season, it felt like, as our kind of backup to Mayenda, and by the end of the campaign was very much the backup to Brian Brobby, but had some really useful impacts off the bench at points. His future doesn't necessarily feel all that secure at Sunderland right now. I think we probably will look to sign another striker, given the fact that Mayenda and Isidore maybe not quite at the level, given the fact that we're now going to compete or try and compete on multiple fronts going forward. There's interest from a number of Premier League clubs, supposedly Crystal Palace if Mateta leaves, supposedly Leeds as well, as they look to secure another sort of more natural backup to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Wilson Isidore, very solid campaign for Sunderland. I think he's a very key part of that dressing room as well. Jean-Rick Bellegarde's committed to them from Wolves as well. Very useful player in transition, very powerful. I think he'll be a useful factor for them as well. And then they've got players coming in from Ghent, from Angers, from Young Boys, from Sochaux. You know, these are some big clubs being represented in this Haiti squad. Ferencvaros as well, there's a representative of as well. So it doesn't feel like just a team of nobodies, like a sort of, not meaning to be too disrespectful, but like a Qatar, for example. Haiti have a little bit of quality, but whether it's too last minute and a little bit too thrown together to cause any serious damage remains to be seen, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is it, right? Like, and I do, you know, there's a little bit of me that worries for squads like this where you do end up putting more people in. Like the two kind of leading lights for Haiti for a long time were Dakar Nazam and Franzi Piero, right? Who play their club football in Iran and in Turkey, respectively. And they must be looking at this being like, hang on, Wilson Isidore's just come in for the World Cup. Like, is that okay? Like, we've kind of been the guys for such a long period. And I wonder what that does in terms of actually kind of balancing it out. They have Jean-Jacques in the midfield who plays for the Union in America, who I think is a very tidy little player. And alongside Bellegarde, who I really like as a footballer. He had a very good first season at Wolves and very much not a very good second season. But I like the way that he kind of shifts the ball around. He's quite difficult to knock off the ball. When he came to the Premier League for the first time from France, I looked at him, I was like, oh, he's a little bit of like Moussa Dembele about the way that he plays. But that comparison has been knocked off by a very difficult kind of season in this. It's not a squad that's going to necessarily, you know, people are going to look at and be like, wow, they're going to cause a lot of problems. And I think, again, you know, getting back to the World Cup is a win within itself. It's a brilliant story of how they've kind of managed to get there, especially in the kind of instability of the region and everything that's gone on. So getting back to this stage, the first time since, I think it was 74 was the last time that they were at a World Cup. They do have a style of play which should work, right? Like, and sometimes I think it's interesting. You kind of get a team. I was on a World Cup After Dark podcast recently talking about, you know, the way that teams play and the way that they kind of set up. And we were talking about Group J in the World Cup and like discussing the idea that whereas Uzbekistan have actually been quite dominant on the ball in kind of regional qualification and some of the tournaments we've seen them in Asia, DR Congo are more of a kind of defensively manifest side who like to play on the counter and hit teams, does that translate better to a World Cup? Because that's how you're going to have to play as a kind of, as an underdog within your group. And I think the Haiti they're pretty vertical. They like to go fast up to the striker. There is a level of it that should kind of suit their status within the group as underdogs. But I think that this group just looks like it's going to be a stretch too far considering the quality in some of the other teams.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's touch on maybe Morocco next. Looking to back up what's been a phenomenal couple of years for this side. And it feels like there's actually a really nice new generation of talent coming through. So it's not just the older guard as well. Everyone knows about Ashraf Hakimi and Naif Agard and Bonu in goal, etc. But there's also Chadi Riyad, who actually had quite a difficult year at Crystal Palace, wasn't really given too much of a chance. I think he had some injury issues as well. Issa Diop's just declared for them after representing France at junior level. I think one of his parents is Senegalese, one of them's Moroccan. There's also Sofiane Amrabat, who everyone knows about. Azedine Ounahi was one of the stars of Qatar 2022, but has actually had a really difficult last few years, never really settling at any particular club. But on a brighter note, Ismail Saibari is a fantastic player to watch. I love watching Bilal Al-Khanous as well, who was really impressive at Stuttgart this year as well. Ayoub Bouadi is someone I've been talking about quite regularly on my channel throughout the season as well. Looks like he's got a massive, massive ceiling. There's talk about a move to PSG, and given the fact there is interest in João Neves and Vitinha, even though I'd be surprised if they decided to leave, having won back-to-back Champions Leagues, and with this squad that feels so united around Luis Enrique and its kind of mission, and now has a sort of stated aim and a clear goal of emulating Real Madrid and winning a three-peat, which, given the quality in that squad, you just wouldn't be surprised about at all. Bouadi going into this PSG squad, maybe it's a little bit too early. He is still only 18 and he's developing really well at Lille. But this is a guy who I think made his debut for Lille either just before or just after his 16th birthday. So maybe he is looking for the next opportunity. El Kaabi's been an Olympiacos legend for a number of years now and has a very impressive scoring record at international level as well. He was, of course, the hero of their Conference League win a few years ago. And then I know, Jack, that you will love Abde.
I do love Abde. He's such a wonderful footballer. And look, I think I'll come to him in a second. But what I do really like about this squad is it feels like it's rounded out really nicely. Like when you actually looked at it a couple of, even back in 2022, when they were such a brilliant team to watch, there felt like there was holes in the squad in terms of, bringing people on or the substitutes not being able to have an impact. You look now at this midfield core in particular, right? And you mentioned Amrabat there, who's had another decent season at Betis without necessarily tearing things up. You look at him and Ounahi in there. I think Nail Al-Nui has had a really, really good campaign at Roma, especially in the second half of it, where he's been trusted a little bit more by Gasperini. And Mourabet's been doing this, for Strasbourg for quite some time now. And he's someone that's clearly trusted by the coach, who obviously worked with a lot of these players at under 21 level. You look at, them and then Bouadi, as you kind of mentioned, Saibari, who can play in the 10 or a bit deeper and is a real goal-scoring threat. You're looking at that and saying, okay, that's not just a good starting three in that midfield. That's good, bench options to have, good rotation options to have. That's a real kind of mix of talent in so many different ways. And then you go to this kind of front line, and yes, El Kaabi kind of probably is the man that leads the line in the end of it. But Abde has had a phenomenal campaign at Betis. And look, he's been talked about as a potential Anthony Gordon replacement at Newcastle. The numbers love him, but the eye test loves him more. He's still a little bit light, but his ability to drive at a player, make things happen, his off-ball work is really impressive as well. He feels like he's finally starting to fulfill that potential. And there was a lot of people very excited about him when he was very, very young. Now it's like, oh, okay, he's going to actually show what he's capable of. And it's about time too, I think, at 24 now, for him to kind of step into the limelight. Obviously, Brahim Diaz had a difficult time of it in the AFCON final, but he comes back in here well trusted, and obviously what's gone on in the courtrooms has gone on in the courtrooms. You've been watching Shamsuddin Talbi for much of this season, and whilst he's been an impact player, it's useful to have those kind of impact players. And the other one is Amai Mouni, right, who's played a little bit more than I expected him to as a youngster at Eintracht after joining in January. He hasn't had, necessarily loads of like starts, if you will, but I think he's been a really fun player to watch. There's talent coming out of Morocco's ears, right? And it feels like the squad is rounded out really beautifully. You said about Diop and Aguerd, but then Chadi Riyad, who obviously played in the Conference League final and I thought did really, really well, can show you what you can do there in terms of how they look at as centre back. When you look at the fullbacks, in Hakimi, who by my friend, is going to kind of hold down a flank all by himself. Mazraoui on the other side. There's also Salah Ad-Din who can play in these areas. I just feel like they're in a really, really good spot. And whilst there is obviously a bit of frustration around what happened with AFCON and all of those different elements and the fact that Walid Regragui has left and they, under new management in the form of Wabi, who was the 21s coach beforehand, has kind of effectively moved up the age groups with some of these players. I'm really excited because if they can put it together, there is no reason they can't do something similar to what they did last time out.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think quarterfinal, they look like a quarterfinal side. And once you get to that stage, if things go for you, if you get the refereeing decisions, if your squad stays fully fit, it's that depth off the bench, which I don't think they had in Qatar to the same extent. And the quality of youth, like these players, whether it's El Kanous or Bouadi, they're playing serious minutes at big clubs and doing well. Talby's coming off a side with a lot of momentum at Sunderland as well. I think, as you say, wasn't necessarily a starter every week, but showed real glimpses of quality and will be a key part of Sunderland's future going forward as well. So I'd be very, very positive if I was a Morocco fan right now.
Okay, should we come on to Brazil? Obviously, 5-time winners of the tournament. They have been, the team that most people associate with the World Cup. Obviously, won the competition the last time that it was held in the United States back in 1994. And you look at them and thinking, well, okay, this is still a pretty special team. And yet, since 2002, where they won the tournament, they've been knocked out in the quarterfinals on 4 of the 5 occasions, that the tournament has taken place. In the middle of that, there is obviously the 7-1 against Germany, which I think still is a spectre, right? Like is a ghost for this team that hangs over them. Yet they have Carlo Ancelotti, and whilst I have some issues with the squad and especially some of the options that they have, especially at fullback, there is still an immense amount of talent in this team. And if they were to get to the knockout stages, you bet against Ancelotti finding a little bit more magic again?
Well, exactly. I think it would actually be good for the World Cup if Brazil had another run to a semi-final at the bare minimum. I think the World Cup is a stronger competition when one of Argentina or Brazil has a good tournament, because the sort of advantages that European sides have in terms of preparation and facilities and the kind of experience of their unions in a contrast to some of these other nations, I think it would just be it'd be a promising thing. And no one likes football like Brazilians. It's just a completely new level, which I think is actually kind of tied into the whole Neymar situation, because we think we love our footballers over here. We love Harry Kane and Wayne Rooney, and I was going to say Jude Bellingham, but he actually gets a lot of unnecessary stick in my eyes. But Brazilians like their players, they're more deities than footballers. And Neymar firmly belongs in that category. His record for Brazil is just phenomenal. 79 goals in 128 games for a player that's been playing out on the wing, that's never even really been a 9. Like, it is unbelievable. And if he can I know he's subsequently picked up an injury, which again kind of is one of the key reasons why people had issues with his selection in the beginning. But if he can get some minutes and get something going, he can carry it, mainly through his force of personality than actually what I think he can do on the pitch. What I like about this Brazil squad is they look very, very solid at centre-back. I know Gabriel's obviously had a bit of a shocker at the weekend. He'll need picking up. But in Bremer as well, a fully fit Bremer, I think, is one of the best defenders in Europe. Marquinhos obviously just won back-to-back Champions Leagues. He's actually had a year where he's barely played in Liga. He's been kind of solely used in the Champions League, using that leadership. Casemiro, brilliant end to the season with Man United. Can his body go again for, what would it be, 7-8 games? Potentially. Bruno Guimaraes has come off some injury issues as well. And then Jack, the quality in that forward line and some, players that have really been trusted after breakthrough campaigns, let's call it, like Igor Thiago getting picked after an amazing season with Brentford, Ryan getting picked after a brilliant half season with Bournemouth, having arrived from Brazil as well, Rafinha coming back from injury, Vinicius Jr. in there. It should be a very fun side to watch, because there's a lot of work rate in that midfield and then a lot of fun and flair up front.
I think what's fun about this is that, Carlo Ancelotti has been like, we're best when we play four up front. Okay, right, we're doing this, are we? And look, whether they have the quality in midfield and at fullback to actually pull that off and not for every game to be helter-skelter is one thing. But it does promise that it's going to be a whole lot of fun. And I'm really, really excited to see what they come up with here and what it looks like, in real time. They've just come off the back of a pretty kind of morale-boosting 6-2 win over Panama in their latest friendly. And one of the things that I was really kind of, you're looking at the team that gets selected and thinking, well, how is this going to balance itself out? But one of the things I thought was interesting was Wesley França ending up getting called up into this team does give them another attacking option from fullback. And he's probably the one fullback you would look at and say, actually, he has had a very good campaign for Roma, mostly playing as a wing back, it must be said. But he's been getting forward. He's been, scoring goals, making assists. And he does give them someone who can get up and down that flank, as opposed to an Alexandro, for example, on the other flank, who maybe is starting to come to the end of his legs a little bit more. But, in Bremer, as you say, in Gabriel, in a couple of other players here who are kind of stepping up into it, there is plenty of quality in the center. It's just about balance. And it looked like, that Bruno Guimaraes and Casemiro midfield worked quite nicely in the first half of this game. They did go for the four up front in that Cunha played as the number 9 and then Rafinha, Vinny Jr. and Luis Enrique behind him kind of rotating in those spaces. I was like, okay. But Endrick coming off the bench, as you say, after a brilliant second half of the season at Lyon, where he was able to kind of impose himself on it, now has the opportunity to showcase him on the highest stage ahead of returning to Real Madrid next season. There is plenty of experience here, which Ancelotti will lean on. But I think the fact that he is not going to be afraid to let them off the leash and be like, just go and play and enjoy. He was like, I think he did an interview recently where he said, winning isn't everything for me. If you actually look at what I want, it's the moments that football gives you. And I think that Brazil have the capability to really kind of showcase some of that at this World Cup.
For sure. It's not a squad to me that looks like a nailed-on favourite amongst the top 2 or 3. I still have Spain and France as the best 2 sides on paper, at least going into this. But if, as an England fan, as someone that takes an interest in any nation, I just would not want to draw them at all, because there are players in that squad that can change the game in a moment, and there's that depth up front that will just be potentially lethal in extreme temperatures. Which we're going to experience during this World Cup. So, yeah, fear them. I think it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a fun Brazil is the best Brazil. I think we can all agree on that. So we will see how they get on, which leaves us with one, Dougie. And that one is old Scotland, who are the 4th team in this group. I mean, look, an incredible qualification. The drama of that qualification with that win over Denmark ended up being 4-2 in the end, with the Kenny McLean scoring from the halfway line, the Scott McTominay overhead kick, which is plastered absolutely everywhere, not least on a note in Scotland.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've seen,
lovely.
there's 100 notes have been released, £20 notes, which have Scott McTominay's overhead kick on them, which is just incredibly special. It felt like getting here was kind of euphoria within itself. But you also do look at this and be like, this is a Scotland team that have been together for such a long period of time. Is there enough trust within the collective that they can continue to bloody noses and continue to shock teams that, I think that in previous years they would have had no business kind of being anywhere near?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. In the last couple of tournaments where Scotland have qualified, I've been quite underwhelmed with the actual results that and the style that they've actually delivered in the tournament. So I hope that they go into this and commit a little bit more and kind of cover up their weaknesses, because I don't actually think they've probably got the quality of defender to invite constant pressure for 90 minutes. Whereas you look at John McGinn, you look at Scott McTominay, you look at Ryan Christie playing really well with Bournemouth, you look at the kind of chemistry that this side should have, given the fact they have played together for so long, had these amazing big finishes in terms of qualifying campaigns and playoffs, etc., that hopefully can carry them through and spring a couple of surprises. The kind of issue is that up front, there's no one that feels like absolutely has to start. There's a few that have made a case over the years. Lyndon Dykes has never really let Scotland down in terms of his effort and fitness or physicality, I should say, but probably doesn't have top level quality to make a huge difference at the World Cup. Maybe the same with Che Adams, although I think he's actually played quite well for Torino over the last couple of years, who haven't necessarily been the most thrilling side to watch at various points. Lawrence Shankland has just had a move confirmed to Rangers after a solid year for Hearts. But Ross Stewart is probably the biggest difference maker, and I probably do say that slightly with my Sunderland hat on, because I'm an absolute Ross Stewart fanatic after his work getting us out of League One. We simply would not be in the position we are today without the likes of Ross Stewart and Elliot Embleton and even Chris McGuire further back than that. So hopefully I'd love to see a Ross Stewart, a Loch Ness Drogba World Cup to remember from him. But in terms of Scotland, I don't necessarily see this squad stacking up particularly well against Morocco either. I think they've got better depth. And kind of, which has been the issue for a long time now, the kind of lack of quality at centre-back feels like it could kind of come unstuck for them a little bit. But I don't want to write them off before we've even started, enjoy it, because it's been so long.
I think the other thing is that first game being against Haiti, who we kind of look at and think, okay, that could be a whipping boy's job, gives them something to play for and hang on to, because you win that one. And then if you get a draw against either Morocco or Brazil, the chances are that you all qualify as one of the best kind of third place teams, which is a great basis to have. So if they can go and win that first game and win it comfortably, then I think that there is a shout that they might be able to kind of change the picture a little bit in that regard. I think you're right, though. It feels all on the midfield. And it's like, okay, are the likes of Scott McTominay and John McGinn going to be able to recreate the goal scoring form that has been so important for their clubs on the international stage? Now, I love Ryan Christie, and he's one of those players who's developed from a tricky winger into a very, very hard-working, dog-of-war kind of midfield type. And I think that there is plenty to come from him. If Ben Gannon-Doak, who hasn't had a particularly brilliant season at Bournemouth, can kind of get going, then they're going to have options in those wide areas. In Andy Robertson and Aaron Hickey, they have fullbacks who can get up the pitch and make a difference and can provide those assists. It does look a little bit like, from a goal-scoring perspective, in terms of the two up front, and they are going to be asked to put a shift out and effectively open up space for the midfielders behind them to potentially come in and make that difference. But I do think it's going to be intriguing to see where Scotland feel their biggest goal threat is. I'm warmer on them because I think the schedule is nice. I think if they win that first one and grab a draw, suddenly you're like, oh, there's a real chance of coming second in the group. But it also gives you that third place kind of cushion of getting out of there. So I think that this is a squad that knows its strengths and weaknesses. It's a manager who fundamentally understands those things. Whether they switch to a 3 at the back again is a question that I think we can kind of maybe not necessarily leave for another day, but it's one to keep an eye on, because there has been a frustration with that and that system in terms of what it brings and not allowing them to create chances and hold the ball in the opposition half. But it equally might be the best answer if they end up getting to a point where they're trying to kind of hold out for a draw against one of the two bigger boys in the group. It might be something that Steve Clarke turns to. So I think that Scotland have a very, very good chance of getting through to the knockouts, but I'm not 100% sure if that comes as a best third place qualifier or not.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'd feel more confident if Scotland's right backs or right wing backs were in better form. But Nathan Patterson's had so many injury issues ever since joining Everton, never really got going there. Aaron Hickey, again, has had an injury disrupted year at Brentford. Andy Robertson was in and out of the side at Liverpool. On the other side, Kieran Tierney actually had a pretty decent end of the season with Celtic, but hasn't played that much football in the last couple of years as well. And, it's a bit of a cliche, but if any of these sides in this group are going to be affected by the heat, it's going to be the Scots. So, there's a lot of things not necessarily filling me with massive confidence in terms of a dark horse for a quarterfinal or even beyond that. But I hope they just go out and enjoy it and play with a little bit more confidence than we've seen in major tournaments gone by. Because I just don't want them to live with regret. Because it's so many of these players, Kenny McLean, John McGinn, Andy Robertson, etc. They might never get another chance at a World Cup.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And look, I think it's going to be interesting. And I think your point is right that we've seen Scotland kind of have magic moments in qualification for the last couple of tournaments and not necessarily be able to kind of translate that onto the stage when it came to the actual tournament itself. It would be nice to see that kind of carried forward when they kick off this time round in Foxborough. So, yeah, I'm excited for Scotland, but I'm also a little bit nervous about this squad and in particular, the lack of goals in that forward line. And with that, Dougie, I think it's probably time for us to call this to a close. So all there's left for me to do is say a massive, massive thank you to you. It's been an absolute pleasure as ever.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Jack. I always love appearing on Ranks FC. Go check out last week's Truth as well, where we're talking about some massive transfer rumours. Anthony Gordon, Morgan Rogers. Well, Anthony Gordon now completed with amazing Spanish on his unveiling, which was great to see as well. He's got a longer Duolingo streak than me, clearly. That was a fun episode, but thanks for having me and enjoy the rest of the previews, Jack, and the tournament itself.
Thank you, Dougie. And hopefully we'll have you back on at some point during the tournament. But Dougs will be on his own YouTube channel covering much of it as well. So make sure if you're not subscribed over there, you go and subscribe to Dougie's YouTube. And with that, that's all from us. I've been Jack Collins. This has been the first of the 4 Ranks FC preview episodes ahead of the World Cup. Thank you so much for listening. More to come in the next couple of days. And we'll see you all very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.